introduces the single dad veteran, his 5 kids, his struggles with poverty, and the heartbreaking moment he gives up his own meal so his children can eat. Explores his backstory, his time in the military, losing his wife, adjusting to civilian life, and the strength it takes to keep his family together. The family's life the following day, small sparks of kindness from neighbors, and how unseen sacrifice often ripples beyond what we know. The night was colder than usual, the kind of cold that seeped into a person's bones and lingered there, gnawing at the spirit as much as the body. And inside a small rented house at the edge of town, a single father sat at a scratched wooden table, staring at the modest dinner he had managed to prepare for his 5 children. A dinner that was little more than a pot of thin soup made from leftover broth, a couple of potatoes, and the last scraps of chicken he had managed to buy that week. But to the 5 pairs of hungry eyes watching him with anticipation, it looked like something precious, like treasure, and he knew in that moment that no matter how little they had, he would find a way to make them feel like the richest kids in the world, even if it meant his own stomach remained empty, because that was what fathers did and that was what love meant, sacrifice without hesitation. And so he smiled at them, hiding the gnawing hunger in his belly, hiding the fatigue that weighed down on his shoulders, hiding the sharp sting of guilt that he could not provide more than this. And in his steady voice that carried both the command of a soldier and the tenderness of a father, he said, "All right troops, line up for chow." And the children laughed at the familiar game where he pretended they were soldiers and he was their commanding officer, and though they had never seen him in uniform, they admired him as if he were still a hero in battle, because to them he was. And so one by one he filled their bowls, making sure to scoop carefully so each had as much as the other, making sure not to show that he had intentionally left nothing for himself, because that didn't matter. What mattered was their bellies being full and their faces shining with joy. And as the youngest Lily lifted her spoon eagerly, she glanced up at him with wide innocent eyes and asked softly, "Daddy, what about you?" And his heart clenched, but he grinned, the kind of grin designed to hide pain, and said lightly, "Don't worry about me, sweetheart. I had a big lunch earlier," though of course that was not true. His so-called lunch had been a single piece of bread and a cup of coffee. But lies told to protect the innocent were not sins, they were acts of love. And the children, though they suspected sometimes, chose to believe him, because belief in their father's strength was easier than facing the hard truth of scarcity. And so they ate, laughing and talking with the cheerful resilience that only children possess, making even a thin soup seem like a banquet. And he watched them, sipping only water, his hunger pangs turning into a dull ache, his chest swelling with pride at their innocence and their bond, but also aching with the bittersweet memory of days gone by when their mother was alive, when dinners were filled with her laughter, her presence, her magic in the kitchen that could turn little into enough. And he felt again the hollow emptiness that losing her had carved into his life, because cancer had taken her away far too soon, leaving him not only grieving but burdened with raising 5 children alone. And though he had been trained for war, trained to endure, nothing had prepared him for this battlefield of fatherhood without a partner, and every day since had felt like a fight, not against bullets or bombs but against poverty, exhaustion, and the relentless weight of responsibility. And some nights he felt like he was still deployed, only this time the enemy was despair and the cost of losing was unthinkable. So he fought in silence, with every ounce of strength he had, stretching his VA disability check as far as it could go, taking odd jobs when his body allowed despite the pain that echoed in his injured back and knees, reminders of the price he had paid in service to his country, and yet none of that compared to the sacrifice he made now, giving up his share so his children could eat. And when the meal was finished, the children leaned against him one by one, small bodies pressing into his sides and arms until he was surrounded by them, their warmth a shield against the cold. And they didn't know, they couldn't know, that he hadn't eaten. They only knew they felt safe and loved, and that was enough for them. And later, as he tucked them into their beds, his youngest Lily whispered, "Daddy, you're the bravest man in the world." And though he had heard many things in his life, command shouted in the chaos of war, the cries of his comrades, the silence of loss, nothing pierced his heart like those words. And he kissed her forehead, whispering back, "No, sweetheart, the bravest people are the ones who keep smiling no matter what." and after they had drifted into the deep peace of childhood sleep, he returned to the kitchen, staring at the empty pot, feeling the weight of hunger and the heavier weight of worry pressing down on him, wondering how he would stretch the few dollars left in his wallet, wondering how he would pay the overdue bills piled on the counter, wondering how long the lights would stay on, and in that moment he prayed, not for himself but for them, prayed that his children would never feel the sting of hunger, never feel the ache of hopelessness, prayed that somehow, some way, he could give them more than this. And though he felt alone in that quiet kitchen, though the night outside pressed dark and cold against the thin walls, he did not know that prayers like his did not vanish. They carried weight, they echoed in unseen places, and sometimes they stirred hearts that were meant to answer. And so as he sat there with his head in his hands, exhausted beyond words, unaware of the forces already in motion, he could not imagine that the very next day, a knock at the door would come. A knock that would change everything, a knock that would turn sacrifice into blessing, a knock that would show that kindness, like courage, always comes back in ways we least expect, and though he didn't yet know it, his empty plate tonight was about to become the symbol of a new beginning for himself, his children, and someone else whose heart was waiting to be moved by his quiet bravery.